In this section then, we'll be looking at some special features of iOS that will help you create even more innovative apps and also help to generate some income from your apps. We're going to start with a feature that was introduced in iOS 9, and that is the custom keyboard. So in iOS now, you can develop your own keyboards and make them behave any way you like, and it's actually quite a bit easier than you might have thought. We're going to be making a custom keyboard for the Game of Thrones character Hodor. If you haven't read or watched Game of Thrones, Hodor is a character who only says Hodor, just the sort of person for whom a custom keyboard might be useful. Okay, so let's jump straight over to Xcode and create our custom keyboard app. So we start in the usual way, File, New, Project, with a single view application, which I'll just call Custom Keyboard. And then create that in the usual way. And this part of the app is designed to be a kind of controller for your custom keyboard. So if you've got some options that you want people to choose between, then this is where you would add all the usual features of an app to allow them to do that. To create the actual custom keyboard though, you need to create a new target, because we're targeting a new aspect of iOS rather than just a standard app. And then over in the iOS section, click on Application Extension and then Custom Keyboard. So a few of these other ones we're going to be looking at later on, but for now, select Custom Keyboard and click Next. I'm going to call this Hodor Board. And then you'll be presented with a new collection of files, specifically the keyboard view controller.swift. So let's have a look and see what the code is doing here. So let's spend a few moments looking at the default code in the keyboard view controller that we've got here. So it's obviously fairly familiar. We've got our UI kit and our main class keyboard view controller. The one IB outlet that we've got is the one IB outlet that you have to have as part of your custom keyboard. And that's a next keyboard button, which allows the user to move on to the next keyboard if they want to. And you can see down in view did load, we're essentially just setting up the next keyboard button. So we're setting it up as a UI button, setting the title, setting the size to fit, setting up auto resizing, or in this case, turning it off. Then we're adding a method to run when the button is pressed, which is a standard method which will essentially move the user on to the next custom keyboard in their list. Then we're adding the next keyboard button to our subview. And finally, we're setting the constraints, essentially to anchor it to the left and the bottom of the view. So that's all that's happening here. Then we've got our standard did receive memory warning. And we also have two methods that are very useful. This is text will change. So this will run just after the user has entered a key to enter some text, but before that text is actually entered. And then this text did change will run immediately after the text is entered. And this last bit of code will be a little bit clearer when we've actually run the keyboard. So let's run this custom keyboard and see what it does. And just to point out at the top, we've got our final new method update view constraints, which just updates the constraints on the view if we want to. For example, when the user changes the phone from portrait mode to landscape mode, you might want to update the constraints of your view. For now though, let's have a look and see what this actually does. So we'll switch back over to our usual iPhone 6s, and when we press run, this time we're offered an app to run, because we're attempting to run the custom keyboard, but that is not an app in itself. So we have to run an app, and then we'll set up the custom keyboard in the settings. So you can choose any one of those really. I'm going to go for today and run it, and then we'll jump over to settings and set up our custom keyboard. And here we are. So as I say, we don't really care about the app itself. We want to go over to settings, and then within settings we click general and keyboard, and then keyboards, and add new keyboard. And then you can see, because we've now run our app on the phone, we've got our option to add custom keyboard. Is our Hodor board. Wonderful. Now to see it in action, we need to enter some text. So I just did Command Shift H to get back to the home screen. And now I'm going to tap Safari. And then click in the box to enter some text. Now at the moment, I've got my Mac keyboard linked up to enter text. So we need to force the keyboard to display. So toggle software keyboard in the hardware menu should do it. There we go. So there's our standard keyboard. To switch over to our keyboard, now that we've set it up, we can click on the little world icon. And then we get a nice friendly message there. And now you can see we've got all the emoji there. If we tap on ABC, then we're presented with our keyboard. And this is it. So it's not particularly exciting. We've just got a single pane of grey. And the only thing we've got is our next keyboard button. So if we press that, it jumps back to the only other keyboard which is installed, which is the standard iOS keyboard. So that's how we access our custom keyboard. Of course, it doesn't do a great deal at the moment. So let's add our Hodor image and see how we actually get that to interact with the text field that the user is currently working in. So back over to Xcode, and before we start writing any code, I'm going to save my Hodor image, and I'm going to use Command Shift 4 to just take a screenshot of Hodor's face, and then we'll go back over to Finder and find it. There it is. So I'll call it something a little more friendly, and then we'll drag that into our project in the usual way. Make sure you drag it into the Hodor board section. There we go. The first thing we need to do is add our Hodor image. And we're going to do that as a button so that it's interactive by default. So let's create a Hodor button. And this is going to be a UI button with a type of just the default button, so .system. Then we're going to set up the frame of the button, so the location and the size, and this is going to be a CG rect. There we go. And I've tried out a few numbers. I think this should work quite well. If we go 150 pixels from the left of the screen, 40 pixels from the top of the keyboard area, a width of 100 and a height of 120. That should look pretty good. Then we'll set our background image. And this is going to be a UI image, which I'll create from a file, so a UI image named Hodor.png for our normal control state. Then we'll add a target, which will essentially allow us to do something when the button is pressed. And the target is the view controller, and then the action is the selector, which we're hopefully now familiar with. And what I'll do just before I add that is set up our method to be called. So I'll call it did press button. And then we should be able to pick that up with selector and then keyboard view controller dot did press button. There we go. And for the UI control event, we want the touch up inside. So essentially when the user has taken their finger off the screen in the button, then the did press button method will be called. Okay, and then we just add that to our view. So self.view.add subview Hodor button. And that's all we need to add that button image. And then we create what's known as a proxy to allow us to access the text field or whatever it is that the user is typing into. And we access this using text document proxy. And slightly oddly, we need to cast it as a UI text document proxy. There we go. And then we just use proxy.insert text. And of course, the text that we want to insert is Hodor. And that's it. So you can choose an app to run. So now that my simulator is running, I have a lot more choice, but I'm going to stick to the original Today app. I did have some problems running it with different apps on one simulator. If you do run into some strange errors, then I'd recommend just shutting the simulator down and running it again from scratch. So let's have a look now. We tap on Safari and then tap in the address field, and there it is. It's actually up there by default. Of course, if it wasn't, then we just click on the globe and then the letters, and there we go. So now if we tap on Hodor, we get Hodor, 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 Hodor. Wonderful. So that's how you create a custom keyboard. That's really all there is to it. Obviously, it's quite a lot more work to create all the different keys and images, etc. if you want to create a full keyboard, but the process is exactly the same as what we've done here. Great, so let's go on now and see some of the other latest and greatest features of iOS.